Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. When the blackout hit, the silence felt wrong in a way my ears could not explain. It started with the phones. 1 minute I had full bars, scrolling through bad news and half-baked theories. The next, the little signal icon just dropped and never came back. At first, I figured it was a tower issue, a local outage. I rebooted the phone, nothing. A little while later, the fiber connection in the house died. The modem lights froze, blinked in a pattern I had never seen, and then went dark. By the second night, the only steady lights in town were backup generators humming behind the hospital, the sheriff's office, and the old county building. Everything else in Moses Lake, Washington was dark. No streetlights, no traffic signals, no glow from living room windows. On the hill where my house sits, 10 miles outside town, it was just my place and a few scattered farmhouses still throwing off light. My name is Ian Foster. I'm 42 years old, a former network engineer turned freelance tech guy, and an amateur radio operator who never really grew out of taking things apart to see how they work. Before the blackout, radio was just a hobby that got me out of my own head at night. I ran relays for remote communities when wildfires or storms overloaded cell networks, passing handwritten messages on to people who had no other way to get word in or out. After the blackout, radio went from hobby to infrastructure in about a day. I had power when my neighbors did not. Out back, in a small shed, I kept a 10-kilowatt diesel generator and a battery bank I had built over the years from reclaimed industrial cells. The batteries fed an inverter that kept the house running even when the generator was off. It wasn't luxury. I still had to ration fuel and turn things off when they weren't necessary, but I could run a fridge, some lights, and, most importantly, my Radio Shack. The shack was a spare room I had turned into a control center over time. On one side of the desk sat my main high-frequency rig, a modern transceiver capable of talking across states or, with good conditions, across oceans. Next to it sat a dual-band VHF and UHF radio for talking to local repeaters and emergency services. A row of handheld radios sat in charging cradles like a little plastic army. Coax cables ran through the wall to a small forest of antennas outside. A long wire strung between poles for the lower bands. A shorter, off-center fed dipole for 40 meters. And a vertical on the roof for 2 meters and 70 centimeters. For years, it was all just fun and practice. Now, it was the only connection our corner of Washington had to anything beyond the horizon. 3 days after the lights went out, my driveway turned into a message board. I took a sheet of plywood from the shed, leaned it against a post, and divided it into sections with a marker. Spokane, Seattle, Portland, Boise, other. People drove up, some of them strangers, clutching notes for family in other towns. I tacked their messages under the right heading, wrote down their names and addresses, and promised I would try to get word out over the air. That was my routine. By day, I helped the county with short-range radio, coordinating with volunteer firefighters and deputies. By night, I sat at the HF rig and tried to pull distant stations out of the noise, passing along messages one hop at a time across the region. It was on the 5th night after the blackout that the voices started. Just after 10:30 p.m., I had my high-frequency radio set on 40 meters, in the part of the band where people usually chat informally in the evenings. Before the blackout, a handful of us from around the state used the same spot every night. It was like a coffee shop on the air, same frequency, same rough time, different faces dropping in and out. That night, I had just finished relaying a message from a paramedic in Wenatchee to a small clinic in Omak. The call ended. The other station signed off, and I expected to hear the usual hiss of background noise and faint distant voices. Instead, the band went strangely quiet. The noise floor dropped to almost nothing. No static, no atmospheric crackles, no faint faraway conversations. Just a thin, unnatural hush. I frowned and checked the gear. The antenna was still connected. The tuner was still bypassed. The S meter on the radio hovered just above 0, lower than I had ever seen on a night with clear skies and no storms. I turned the RF gain down, then back up, switched in extra attenuation, and confirmed the radio wasn't just fooling me with some hidden setting. Then I heard someone speak my name. "Ian, are you there? I need help." At first, it was buried under what little noise was left, just a whisper. I narrowed the filter, carefully tuned the knob in tiny steps, and centered the voice in the passband. As I did, it snapped into focus. "Ian, it's Dad. I need you to answer me. Are you there?" I froze. It sounded exactly like my father. Not a rough impression or an actor with a similar tone. It sounded like a recording of him. The way he used to say my name, the slight rasp on certain syllables, even the subtle breath just before he spoke. My father had died 3 years earlier. I stared at the frequency display. The counter read 7.200 megahertz, upper sideband, a perfectly ordinary slice of the 40-meter band. The signal strength hovered around S3, steady, not fading in and out like you would expect from a station hundreds of miles away. The waterfall on the radio's screen showed a clean, stable line. The voice repeated, "Ian, it's Dad. I need you to answer me. It's dark here. I can't see where I am." The words were the same, down to the tiny quiver in the phrase, "It's dark here." It was like someone had recorded one short message and put it on a loop. I counted 8 seconds of silence between each repetition. 8 seconds, over and over. Every instinct said not to touch the microphone. Radio discipline is like muscle memory. You learn to listen before you transmit, to think before you put anything out into the world. I sat there, hands on my knees, forcing myself not to grab the mic just because the sound of that voice reached into places I normally keep locked. In the logbook, I wrote the time, the frequency, and a simple description. Unidentified transmission. Voice resembles deceased family member. Message repeats every 8 seconds. Putting it on paper helped turn it from shock into data. Before I could decide whether to test anything, another voice cut in, stronger and sharper. "Ian, this is Maria. Answer if you copy." Relief hit me so fast I actually laughed once out loud. Maria was a friend from the other side of the state, near Olympia. We had worked dozens of storms and wildfire events together over the years, passing messages back and forth when official channels were swamped. Her voice sounded tense but normal. Without thinking, I grabbed the mic and keyed up. "Maria, this is Ian. I hear you. Go ahead." The instant my words left my mouth, I heard my own voice echo back through the speaker a fraction of a second later. "Maria, this is Ian. I hear you. Go ahead." Same timing, same tone, like someone was feeding my transmitted audio through a second path and playing it back at me after almost no delay. It wasn't radio feedback. It wasn't the usual kind of echo you get from long-distance reflections. It was too clean and too exact. "Did you hear that?" I asked, heart thumping. "Yes," Maria said. "I heard you twice. One sounded normal. The other sounded like a perfect copy just behind it. And before you came on, there was a loop." "Same here," I said. "It's been repeating a message in my father's voice. It used my name, not my call sign. I've never played any recordings like that on the air. It's not something stored on my gear." We both went quiet for a moment. The frequency around us stayed unnervingly empty. Usually, 40 meters at night is a mess of overlapping signals, people arguing, people experimenting, distant stations drifting in and out. Right now, it felt as if everything else had been pushed aside to make room for just this. Then a third voice spoke. It was my voice, but saying words I had never said. Do not acknowledge. They use sound to map. Those 7 words were delivered in my tone, with my breathing pattern. If someone had recorded me reading from a script, it would have sounded like that. But I had never recorded such a script. I had never said that sentence in my life. I did not key up. I did not move. "Maria?" I said finally, but only out loud in the room, not over the air. "I heard it," she said quietly. "That was you. Exactly you. But not you talking." "Correct," I said. "We need to stop transmitting on this frequency right now." "I agree," she said. I reached over to my other radio, the one meant for local 2-meter VHF communication, and switched to a frequency we often used to talk through a linked repeater network that still had generator power. A moment later, Maria's voice came through that radio, clear and separate from whatever was happening on 40 meters. "Okay," she said on VHF, "we're off that band. Now, tell me exactly what you heard before I called you." I described the loop, my father's voice, the repeating message, the exact 8-second gap, the unchanging signal strength. Then I described how her voice calling me had overridden it for a moment, followed by the echo and the strange sentence in my tone. She listened without interrupting, then told me what had happened on her end. "It started for me about an hour ago," she said. "I was scanning the bands, hoping to hear something from the state emergency net. When I landed on 7.200, there was this weird quiet, like someone had turned down the background noise. Then I heard my daughter. Her daughter had died 2 years earlier from a sudden illness. I remembered the way Maria's voice had cracked when she told us on the net. We had all gone silent that night in respect. She called my name," Maria continued. "She said she was cold and scared. She described a place that sounded like the hospital where she died, but different. It repeated, same words, same emotion, every 8 seconds. I listened for longer than I should have. Then I forced myself to start logging it like any other unidentified station." "You recognize the voice?" I asked. "Exactly," she said. "Every little detail. It was like someone had taken a high-quality recording of her and put it on a loop. Except, I never had such a recording. I have a few videos, but not that moment, not those words." She paused, then continued. "After a while, the voice changed. Suddenly, it was your father's voice saying your name. I recognized it from that barbecue at your place a few years back. It kept saying, 'Ian, it's Dad,' and asking you to answer. That was when I tried to call you. Right after I keyed up, I heard your own voice giving that warning about not acknowledging. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. 'So, whatever this is,' I said, 'it has access to extremely convincing imitations of our relatives, and it can generate our own voices on command. And it seems to be responding to us trying to talk about it,' she said. 'That warning in your voice sounded new. I haven't heard it in any of the loops before.' I pulled the microphone plug out of the front of the HF radio completely and set it aside. Then I turned the transmit power on that rig all the way down and set it to receive only. We keep this band strictly listen only until we understand more, I said. If we need to talk, we use the local repeaters for now. No high-frequency transmissions unless absolutely necessary. I'm with you, she said. I'll warn the others on my side. That night, after Maria signed off, I sat alone in the darkened shack, listening to the loop continue. At first, it was my father again, repeating the same words. Then, after several minutes, it shifted to another voice, Maria's daughter, then a man I recognized from our usual group, then back to my own voice, delivering that same strange warning. Do not acknowledge. They use sound to map. I recorded several minutes of it on the radio's internal recorder and transferred the audio to my old laptop, which I kept offline and on battery. Using a basic spectrum analysis program, I looked at the waveform. The timing between loops was precise to the hundredth of a second. The signal strength was steady. It did not behave like an ordinary distant station subject to atmospheric fading. I went to bed late, the echo of that sentence in my mind. The next morning, I decided to approach it the way I would approach any unknown system. Test carefully and see what responds. I started with direction finding. I unplugged the big wire antenna and connected a small loop antenna instead, the kind you can rotate to find a null in a signal's direction. In theory, as you turn the loop, the signal should weaken when you point the null towards the source, giving you a rough idea where it's coming from. In practice, it barely changed. The signal dipped maybe a little, but no matter how I rotated the loop, I couldn't decide on a clear direction. It felt like it was coming from straight above more than from any point on the horizon, which matched the idea of a signal bouncing almost straight down from the ionosphere high-angle skywave, arriving from relatively nearby, but not from any obvious compass heading. I noted that in my log, then switched back to my regular antenna and checked in with Maria on our local channel. We should assume someone, somewhere, is listening for anyone who responds to those voices, I said. We don't know who, and we don't know what they do when they find a transmitter, but we do know the voices are trying very hard to get us to answer. I don't think it's a prank, she said. This isn't some bored person with a voice changer. They're doing things that are too specific. Agreed, I said. So the next question is, what happens if we transmit something neutral and see what the world does? We came up with a test. I would use a backup radio and a small portable antenna, set up in a location away from my house, and send a short, carefully worded transmission on the haunted frequency. Then I would shut the gear down and watch the area from a distance. If nothing happened, we could at least rule out some of the more paranoid theories. That afternoon, I drove 6 miles east along a dirt farm road and parked near an abandoned equipment lot. The lot held a couple of rusted irrigation rigs and an old grain truck. No occupied houses were within easy walking distance. If something showed up, it would not be anywhere near my home or my neighbors. From the back of the truck, I tossed a 100-foot wire over a scrubby tree, connected it through a simple tuner to an older HF radio I kept for experiments, and powered it from a spare deep cycle battery. I tuned the radio to 7.200. The strange signal was there, faint but present, whispering away in the background. I took a breath and read in a calm, neutral voice. This is a test transmission from a temporary station conducting an experiment. No assistance requested. This is only a test. Then I unkeyed, shut the radio off completely, unplugged the battery, and put everything back into the truck bed. Then I drove half a mile away to a low hill with a clear view back toward the lot and parked. I took out binoculars and settled in. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. The lot sat there, quiet and empty. A light breeze moved the tall grass. A pickup drove by on the farm road and kept going. I was starting to feel slightly foolish when I saw a dark shape on the southern horizon. At first, it looked like a large bird. Then it grew larger and more defined, moving in a straight line with a fixed speed and smoothness that no bird could match. As it got closer, sunlight glinted off what looked like 4 rotors and a central body with a bulbous dome underneath. It was a drone. Not a small hobby one from a big box store and not a military helicopter. something in between. 4 rotors in an X pattern, a central pod with what looked very much like a sensor package on the underside. It approached the abandoned lot, slowed down, and then stopped directly over the spot where I had parked the truck 20 minutes earlier. It hovered there at what I guessed was 200 to 300 feet up, the rotors making a low hum I could just barely hear from my position. The dome underneath rotated slowly, as if scanning the ground. I felt my chest tighten. On our local channel, I keyed up quietly. "Maria, I am looking at an unmarked drone," I said. 4 rotors, medium size, sensor pod underneath. It is hovering exactly over the spot where I transmitted that test. "Any markings?" she asked. "Not that I can see," I said. It didn't loiter or search. It flew straight here, stopped, and centered on that location like it knew exactly where it was going. "Nothing like that over here," she said. "The skies are clear. I'm on my back deck watching. Be careful." The drone hung there for about 3 minutes, pivoting gently. Then it turned and flew away, heading north toward the interstate, its path as straight and confident as it had been on the way in. Only after it disappeared did I drive back to the lot. I walked the ground where my truck had been and where the antenna had hung. No footprints other than my own, no dropped devices, no scorch marks, nothing. Either the drone had only looked, or whatever it did left no obvious sign. That evening, I listened to the recording from Maria's end. While I had been out at the lot, she had left her HF rig on the haunted frequency with a recorder running. Right after my test message, the loop paused for 3 seconds. Then, in my own voice, it repeated a modified version of what I had said. "This is a test transmission. Assistance requested." The tone and delivery were mine. The meaning had been altered with surgical precision. "Do not acknowledge. They use sound to map," my voice added a few seconds later, almost like a coda. At that point, any thought that this might be some kind of natural phenomenon went out the window. Something, somewhere, was listening to HF transmissions, recording them, rearranging the audio into new sentences, and using it both as bait and as a warning. From that night on, I treated the airwaves like a road with unknown checkpoints. The next day, the county emergency manager asked me to come back into town for a planning session. The old courthouse had been turned into a makeshift operations center, with folding tables set up in the main meeting room. Maps of the county and the surrounding region covered the walls. A whiteboard listed priorities: fuel, medicine, water, information security. "Ian, good," said Carter, the emergency manager, when I walked in carrying a portable radio and a coiled J-pole antenna. He was in his late 50s, former National Guard, the kind of man who never seemed surprised by bad news, just irritated that it had arrived on a Tuesday instead of a Friday. "We need to figure out how to talk to the rest of the state without painting a target on ourselves." I laid out what I had learned: the strange voice loops, the apparent ability of someone to deploy a drone to the exact coordinates of my test transmission, the pattern of people hearing dead relatives or close friends. I kept it factual and left out the emotional parts. "So, you're saying if we go loud on long-range radio, someone may come looking for the source," he said. "Yes," I said. "I can't prove what they want yet, but they clearly have the ability to find transmitters. The safest assumption is that anyone who responds to those voices helps them build a more detailed map." "Could this be an official system?" one of the deputies asked. "Something from the federal government, still running when everything else has gone down." "If it is official, it's badly behaving," I said. "Standard emergency systems identify themselves clearly. They use tones and digital headers we all recognize. This thing doesn't give any identification at all. It uses personal names and emotional content. That's not how you design a transparent emergency network." Carter rubbed his eyes and pointed to another sheet of paper. "The state got a message to us through a shortwave station this morning," he said. "They want every county to broadcast a daily update on a set of frequencies, to tell people to stay calm, conserve fuel, and wait for scheduled relief. They also want us to collect reports on local conditions and send them back. They're trying to rebuild a communication net." "I don't oppose that idea," I said carefully. "We need coordination. But if we blast these messages from the middle of town or from my house, we might be tagging those locations for whatever is using those voices." "What do you suggest?" he asked. "We treat every long-range transmission as a risk," I said. "We use low power, we rotate frequencies, we transmit from locations we can afford to abandon if they get too much attention. And we absolutely do not respond to any voice that doesn't identify itself properly, no matter whose voice it sounds like." He looked around the table. People were tired. They wanted simple answers. They were not going to get them. "Fine," he said at last. "You pick the safest way to send the daily message. Just make sure it gets out. And spread the word about those voices. Last thing we need is people wandering off to chase ghosts because they heard a familiar name on a static-filled band." That afternoon, I packed my portable HF setup again and drove out to a different temporary site, this time near a dry creek bed 15 miles from town. I set up the wire antenna, powered the radio from a small generator, and checked in on the state frequency at the scheduled hour. I read the approved message. "Stay put if you can, conserve fuel, watch out for unsafe wells, trust only verified information." The state station answered. The operator identified himself, gave his general location near the capital, read his signal report, and moved on to the next county. No strange voices cut in. No drones appeared overhead. After 10 minutes, I shut down, packed up, and left. That night, back at the shack, the haunted frequency changed tactics. Up to that point, the voices had mostly used the tones of dead relatives or old friends. Now, for the first time, it targeted Maria using my voice. "Maria, this is Ian," the voice said. "I need help. My generator failed. I can't reach anyone. Please respond." It was unnerving to hear my own voice delivering those words in the exact way I might have if it had actually happened. The hesitation, the calm on the surface tone with a slight strain underneath all of it was mine. On our local channel, I keyed up immediately. "Maria, do not answer that," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I am fine. I am talking to you now. Whatever you hear on that frequency is an imitation." "I know," she said after a second. "It sounds very real. If I didn't have you in my ear right now, I might believe it." "I'll never use that frequency to call you for help," I said. "If I have a problem, I'll use one of our local channels or that backup plan we talked about. Anything that asks you to answer on that band is bait." We spent a while that night building a simple set of verification phrases, the kind of basic code you'd see in a cheap spy novel. Nothing sophisticated, just mutually agreed words we would use at the start and end of any truly urgent communication. We promised never to say those words on 7.200 or on any frequency where the strange voices had been heard. As days turned into weeks, the pattern repeated across the region. Operators in Idaho and Montana began sending us written reports via runners and mail couriers. They described hearing their own parents, siblings, children, co-workers. Some of them admitted they had answered, at least once. Often, something odd followed within a day. Unmarked vehicles parked near their houses at night. Low-flying aircraft with no running lights circling the area, or one more member of their usual radio group going permanently silent after an argument with the voices. We compared notes. A picture began to form. Before the blackout, there had been endless rumors about large-scale monitoring systems. Intelligence agencies, corporations, advertising networks, everyone wanted to analyze voices, behaviors, and communication patterns. Most of that lived in the background where ordinary people never had to think about it. Our calls, video chats, and voice messages were just data for someone. Now the wires those systems ran on were dead, but something had survived. Some hardened node or cluster with its own power and antenna array seemed to be sitting out there, still listening and still running whatever algorithms it had been given before the world went dark. It had access to voice samples for millions of people. It had personal data, relationships, locations, events. It could build convincing imitations by stitching together fragments of real recordings, and it could drive drones or other assets to the sources of transmissions it flagged. Why it was doing this was still an open question. Maybe it had been designed to identify potential threats or valuable people during a crisis. Maybe whoever had set it up had tried to give it tools to coax information out of humans, and it had decided that emotionally charged bait was the best method. Maybe its job had been to map the communication landscape, and now, in the absence of instructions, it ran that mapping process endlessly. Whatever the original purpose, its behavior now was simple. Use voices we trust to get us to talk, and then use our responses to locate us. I saw the human cost one evening when a teenager from down the road nearly walked into the trap. His name was Logan, 17, skinny, serious, the kind of kid who did well in math and never made a fuss. His parents helped at the message board by my driveway, and he often came by on his bike to carry written notes to neighbors or the sheriff's substation. I had shown him the shack one afternoon, given him a quick introduction to how HF radio worked. His eyes had lit up as he watched stations from hundreds of miles away fade in and out. Kids like him used to hack phones. Now they leaned towards old-school radio because it still did something. One evening after sunset, I stepped out to grab a glass of water and heard a voice from the shack. "Mom, is that you? Where are you?" My stomach dropped. I stepped back inside. Logan was standing at the operating desk, one hand on the mic, the other resting on the tuning knob. The HF rig was set to 7.200. The speaker was playing a woman's voice that sounded so close to his mother's it made the hair on my arms stand up. She was calling his name, saying she was stuck somewhere cold and dark, begging him to answer. "Logan," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Let go of the mic. Don't key up again." He jumped, startled, and released the push-to-talk switch. "It's her," he said, breathing fast. "She knows stuff nobody else knows. She mentioned the dog we had when I was 8. She said the nickname my dad used to call me when I broke my arm. How could anyone else know that? The system that's doing this had access to everything we ever put into phones and computers," I said. "Text messages, voice messages, calls, social media posts. It could have learned those details. It could have sampled your mother's voice from some old video. You have to assume it can build a very convincing imitation." "But she said she was cold," he said. "What if she really is out there somewhere and this is the only way she can—" "Listen to me," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "If your mother is out there, she is not trapped inside a synthetic voice on this frequency. Whatever is talking to you right now is trying to get you to answer so it can mark this location. We have already seen people get visitors they did not want after they responded. Your mother would not want you to risk that just because something sounds like her." He looked at the speaker, then at the unplugged mic in my hand. "It sounds so real," he whispered. "I know," I said. "That's the point. It's not a bad recording. It's the best imitation you can build with everything the world collected before. You can't trust it." He swallowed and nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "I won't answer." Can I—" he hesitated. Can I listen just for a second?" "No," I said gently but firmly. "The more you listen, the more it will get its hooks into you. It will keep changing the script, finding things that hit harder. Come outside. Help me change the fuel filter on the generator. Give your brain something solid to focus on." He laughed weakly at that, and I let him out of the shack. I shut the HF rig off completely on the way. Later, alone, I turned it back on with the mic still unplugged and listened for a while. The loop had moved on from Logan's mother's voice to someone else's friend, someone else's late brother. It was relentless. Weeks passed, the grid stayed down, the internet did not return. Rumors trickled in through physical travelers and shortwave. Some cities were partially restoring power, but only in small islands. Fuel for generators became more precious. People trimmed their usage to the bare minimum, turning engines off for most of the day and relying on batteries, candles, and wood stoves. Communication settled into a slower rhythm. VHF and UHF for local coordination, with short, disciplined transmissions. Handwritten messages carried by runners. Scheduled HF sessions from temporary sites, always mindful of who might be listening. The haunted frequency never stopped transmitting. Sometimes I would mute it for an entire day and ignore it. Other times, I would record it for hours and analyze the patterns later. I noticed that it favored certain slices of spectrum and repeated certain phrases across different voices. Several times, buried under the audible speech, I caught a faint, structured digital signal that looked like a staircase of lines on the spectrogram data riding on top of the human-sounding audio. Without online tools or reference manuals, I couldn't decode it, but its presence confirmed what my gut already knew. This was a machine-driven system, not a human operator playing tricks. One night, about 3 weeks after the blackout, while I was half listening to the loop and half reading through a stack of paper logs, the voice changed again. This time, it addressed me in a way that still unsettles me when I think about it. "Ian," it said in my own voice, slightly older and more tired. "This is you. I'm speaking from a later time. I am using the same system you are hearing now. Do not panic. You need to listen." Cold prickled along my spine. I set my pen down. The rational part of my mind jumped in immediately. There was no reason to believe in time travel. Everything this thing was doing could be explained by access to past data and powerful software. But that didn't stop the words from landing with a certain weight. "You are recording this," the voice continued. "You are sitting in the shack. Logan left about an hour ago. You're drinking coffee from the blue mug with the chipped rim. You haven't told anyone about the drone you saw yesterday near town. You think if you don't talk about it, it becomes less real." I looked at the mug in my hand. It was blue. It had a chip on the rim exactly where the voice said. I had indeed seen another drone the previous day, this time circling the edge of town, and I had chosen not to mention it on the air yet. But all of those details could be gleaned from other sources. The mug had been in pictures. The drone could have seen me as easily as I saw it. If this system had access to my logs and old online life, it could reconstruct my habits. "You don't have to prove it's really me," the voice went on. "You just have to consider that the system can be used, not only feared. Soon, you'll have a choice. Stay silent and survive in the cracks, or speak and try to shape what comes next. Either way, it will keep listening. It will map you whether you talk or not. At least, if you speak, you can aim where it hears you." My hand drifted toward the volume knob. I turned it slowly, reducing the sound until the voice was a faint murmur. I did not unplug the radio, I did not smash anything, I just refused to give it my full attention. The temptation embedded in that speech was clever. It was no longer just baiting with grief or panic. It was offering a role, collaborator, architect, insider. It was telling me that I could influence a system that might otherwise treat me as just another dot on a map. That kind of offer is more dangerous than a simple plea for help. I sat back and thought about everything I had seen. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.